Mr. President, I rise to speak on the National Defense Authorization Act and the conference report that accompanies it that we're voting on later today. I want to first acknowledge that Chairman Levin and Ranking Member McCain have worked tirelessly to craft a defense authorization bill that provides our armed forces with the equipment and the services that they need to keep us safe. And I want to thank them, their staffs, and my colleagues for their diligence and their dedication to this important work. Now, I also come to the floor because I want to share, as I have over these last few weeks, the concerns that many Americans, and especially the people I represent, Coloradans, have expressed over these last weeks about the detainee provisions that have been included in the Defense Authorization Bill. And I want to make it clear that I still have some very strong concerns about these provisions, especially because they've been presented as a solution to alleged gaps that exist in our counterterrorism policy. And it's my strong belief that our military men and women, law enforcement officials, and counterterrorism professionals have done an outstanding job since 9/11 to keep our nation safe. For 10 years, we've killed, captured, and prosecuted terrorists, and I believe, in fact, I know our system has been successful. And the professionals who I mention here, who are actually in charge of waging this battle to keep us safe, agree with me that these detainee provisions are of some real concern. And that includes the Secretary of Defense, Mr. President, the Director of National Intelligence, and both directors of the FBI and the CIA. And in speaking to these concerns that I hold, along with the people I just mentioned, the administration itself has stated, and I want to quote here, "We have spent 10 years since September 11th, 2001, breaking down the walls between our intelligence, military, and law enforcement professionals. Congress should not now rebuild those walls and unnecessarily make the job of preventing terrorist attacks more difficult." And I know many agree, especially Coloradans who've contacted me in very impressive and large numbers. And they believe, like I do, because these detention provisions could endanger our national security, that we ought to take a hard look at where we're heading. And I strongly objected, Mr. President, to these provisions back in the summer when the Armed Services Committee first considered them. In fact, I was the only member of the Armed Services Committee who cast a no vote during the committee markup. I felt a little lonely at that point in time, but I think my judgment has been recognized by the outpouring of concern about where we may be heading. So let me talk a little bit about what they do. The provisions could authorize the indefinite military detention of American citizens who are suspected of involvement in terrorism without charge, even those captured here in the United States. The point I've tried to make over and over again, this should concern each and every one of us. If these provisions deny American citizens their due process rights under a new nebulous set of directives, it not only would make us less safe, but it will serve as an unprecedented threat to our constitutional liberties. Senator Graham, my dear friend from South Carolina, has stated that if an American citizen takes up arms against the United States, then he or she should be treated as an enemy combatant. I agree. However, the dangerous part of that proposition is as follows. How do we go about determining who those individuals are? No matter how serious the charge may be, the Constitution requires us to provide our citizens with due process before they are incarcerated, especially indefinite incarceration. If we start labeling our citizens as enemies of the United States without any due process, I think we will have done real damage to the system of justice in our country, which, by the way, is admired all over the world. So my colleagues and I agree that we've got to take every action necessary to keep our nation safe. But what separates us, what makes America exceptional, is that even in our darkest hours, we ensure that our Constitution prevails. We do ourselves a grave disservice by allowing for any citizen to be locked up indefinitely without trial, no matter how serious the charges against them. Doing so, it may make us feel safer, it may be politically expedient, but we risk losing the principles of justice and liberty that have kept our republic strong, and it does, frankly, nothing to make us safer. No terrorist, no weapon, no physical threat is powerful enough to destroy who we are as a people. And that's why we've got to remain diligent in ensuring we hold true to the principles that make our country great. I was a member of the conference committee on this bill, and during the conference committee negotiations resulted in a clarification that was made to ensure that these provisions are not to be interpreted to, quote, affect the existing criminal enforcement and national security authorities of the FBI or any other domestic law enforcement agency, end of quote. These were helpful changes and hopefully will prevent the undermining of our constitutional liberties and the interruption of domestic counterterrorism efforts. So, however, while I was pleased that my colleagues were willing to acknowledge that the language presented serious problems and left many questions unanswered, I still remain concerned about the detention provisions. Making changes to the law that have serious ramifications for our Constitution and our national security deserve serious thought and deliberation, and yet to this day we've not had a single hearing on these matters. These detention provisions, Mr. President, even as they're amended, will present numerous constitutional questions that the courts will inevitably have to resolve. And the provisions will present logistical problems that our national security experts will have to wade through. It sure feels to me like these changes are being forced on an already nimble and effective counterterrorism community against their warnings, and I remain unconvinced of their benefit. I continue to believe that the best course of action would be to separate these detention provisions from the Defense Authorization Bill so that we can take our time, speak to experts in the field, and make sure that we are effectively balancing our counterterrorism needs and the constitutional freedoms of American citizens. Most importantly, we need to understand and we need to ensure that we're not damaging our national security. So, Mr. President, that's why I made it clear in signing the conference report that I do not support the two flawed detention provisions, Section 1021 and 1022. Now, all of that said, the United States Senate has a solemn obligation to our men and women in uniform to pass a Defense Authorization Act. And as a proud member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I understand the importance of this bill for our military and for their families. And while I continue to have serious reservations about the detention provisions and sought to separate them from the Defense Authorization Bill, we face a single vote on the entirety of the defense bill, which includes the amended detention provisions. That's not how I wanted to proceed, but that's how we face the choice in front of us. For those of you who join me in voicing opposition to the detention provisions, I want to thank you. We fought to ensure the rights of American citizens are not trampled with ease, and we joined the counterterrorism community to demand the full use of existing tools to fight the enemy. We showed that such a debate was worth having and secured revisions to the language that will now help us continue the important work of ensuring that both our Constitution and our national security remain protected. Though I intend to vote for the final passage of the conference bill, I want to make clear that I do not fully support the bill. I sincerely believe that this debate is not over, and there's much work left to do. Over the coming months and years, as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I intend to hold this administration and any further administration accountable in the implementation of these provisions. I will also push us, the Congress, to conduct the maximum amount of oversight possible as it relates to these provisions. We must apply a heightened level of scrutiny to ensure that what passes the U.S. Senate today does not deny U.S. citizens their due process rights and does not impede our counterterrorism efforts by hamstringing our military, the FBI, the CIA, or others who keep us safe.